The Bernie Rodenbar bench, I shelled out the bucks for the Matt Scudder bench. The Bernie Rodenbar bench was bought for him by his fans.
As part of, what, was this a fundraising thing when they cleaned up the park behind the library?
Yes, it was related to that. And after I mentioned in the newsletter that I had bought the Matthew Scudder bench for Matt to occupy in the evening, I got a lot of letters, well, several anyway, from people saying, well, why doesn't Bernie have a bench? You know, what is this nonsense? He should have a bench too. And I mentioned this to my accountant, and he said, if they want Bernie to have a bench, let them pay for it, you know. And remarkably, they did.
Everybody's saying contributions. Well, I've actually sat on the Bernie Rodenbar bench.
Oh,
so
you have?
I have.
Okay.
No. I'm a great devotee of the New York Public Library, and I know for a long time that area behind it was an absolute disaster. It was a real junkie heaven.
And after a while, the junkies wouldn't go there. They were afraid. It was really a bad place.
So it was a terrific process, and I thought how appropriate, you know, that. And in fact, it's an interesting thing about you. Here you are, a guy from Buffalo, and yet it seems that New York is woven into every fiber of your being. That's what you write about most of the time, and you're almost like the quintessential. You live in Greenwich Village.
Right.
When I first met you, were you living in Florida?
I may have been. Lynn and I moved down there for a couple of years in the mid-'80s.
Right, and it didn't work, did it?
No.
And that was partly because, well, you needed that New York?
I guess so. I think we're just New Yorkers in a really bone-deep way. And I did grow up upstate, but I think I was a New Yorker ever since my father took me there for a weekend when I was 10 years old. And as soon as I could, I moved there.
You stopped off, though, in Racine, Wisconsin, if I recall.
I've had other places where I lived briefly. I lived in Racine for about a year and a half. I moved back to Buffalo at one point, but and I was out on the coast for about 6 months. I was living at the Magic Hotel in Los Angeles. But I've really, well, even when I've been away from New York, I've had one foot there.
Well, you write about it superbly. To that end, would you feel like reading us a little selection from something?
Sure. I just happen to have it here.
Isn't that magic?
Mick Ballou went into his office in the back. He sleeps there sometimes on the green leather couch and keeps several changes of clothing in the oak wardrobe. He has a desk there, too, and a massive old Mosler safe. There's always a lot of cash in the safe, and I can't believe the box would be all that hard to crack. So far, no one has ever been fool enough to try. He emerged from the office after a few minutes with his hair neatly combed and wearing a fresh sport shirt and slacks. He said a few words to one of the darts players, laid a gentle hand on the shoulder of an old man in a cloth cap, and slipped behind the bar to pour himself a drink. He threw down a quick shot to take the chill off, and I could almost feel the warm glow radiating outward from the solar plexus, providing comfort, warming the body and the soul. Then he refilled his glass and brought it to the table along with a fresh cup of coffee for me. He is a large man, my friend Mick, tall and heavy, with a head that would not look out of place among the ancient sculptures on Easter Island. There was a primitive and monolithic quality to him. Years ago, a wit at Morrissey's After Hours described Stonehenge as looking like Mick and his brothers standing in a circle. It may be fitting, then, that he is just about the last of a vanishing breed, the tough Irish criminals who have been drinking and fighting and raising hell in the West 40s and 50s since before the Civil War. Various gangs and mobs held sway. The Gophers, the Rhodes Gang, the Parlor Mob, the Guerrillas. A lot of their leaders were saloon keepers, too, from Mallet Murphy and Paddy the Priest to Oni Madden. They were as cheerfully vicious as any group New York ever saw, and they might have made a more lasting mark on the place if they hadn't had such an all-consuming thirst. According to Mick, God created whiskey to keep the Irish from taking over the world. It had certainly kept the Hell's Kitchen hoodlums from taking over the city. A few years ago, some newspaper reporters started calling the current crop the Westies, and by the time the tag caught on, there was hardly anybody left to pin it to. The neighborhood bad guys were mostly gone, dead of drink or violence, doing life sentences somewhere upstate, rotting away in the back wards at Manhattan State Hospital. Or they were married and living somewhere in the suburbs, getting fat and sluggish, running crooked auto repair shops, rigging the games in church Las Vegas night fundraisers, or working all week for their fathers-in-law and drinking themselves sodden on the weekends. Mick, the son of a woman from County Mayo and a father born in France, not far from Marseille, was a man who drank whiskey like water, a career criminal, a brutal killer who would costume himself for a night of slaughter in the butcher's apron his father had worn, then wear the same apron to Mass at St. Bernard's. There was no reason why we should have become friends, and no way to explain our friendship. Nor could I find an explanation for these long nights of ours, when the stories flowed like water or like whiskey. He would drink for both of us, filling his glass time and time again with a 12-year-old Jameson. I would keep him company with coffee, with Coca-Cola, with soda water. Maybe, as Jim Faber has suggested, it was a way for me to have the drink without the hangover, to recapture the sweetness of saloon society without risking a seizure or liver damage. Maybe, as Elaine proposed, the two of us had a long karmic history together and were just renewing the ties that had bonded us in innumerable past lives. Or perhaps, as had sometimes occurred to me, Mick was at once the brother I never had and the road I'd left untaken. And maybe we're both just men who like a long night in a quiet room and a good story or two.